Tell Me More podcast is being recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. This episode contains conversations about body image and eating disorders and may be distressing for some listeners. Please take care when listening. If you or someone you know needs immediate support, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. Specific eating disorder resources can be found via the Butterfly Foundation. You will find links in our show notes. My name is Olivia Molly Rogers, and I'm excited to get comfortable in the uncomfortable with you and remind you that nobody is perfect and everybody has something going on behind the scenes that you may not know about. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello and welcome back to Tell Me More. Today we are joined by a certified eating disorder recovery coach and the founder of Uncovery, Olivia Soha. Inspired by her personal journey with an eating disorder, Olivia strives to make recovery services more accessible in Australia. Welcome, Olivia, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Liv. It's great to be here.
Now, I have to flag that I've got a bit of a cold, which is why I don't sound quite like myself. I'm a little bit husky, a little bit deep, but hopefully it doesn't distract too much throughout the episode. I'm really excited to have you on. I've shared a lot about my personal experience with an eating disorder, but I've never had someone who's in the recovery space on the podcast before. So I think that this will be really beneficial to the listeners. So thank you for joining me. If you're happy to, I'd love to start by just hearing about your personal journey.
100%. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it's such a privilege to be able to share my story. As we were saying before, just before we started rolling, it's so important to have someone who's recovered in your corner to inspire hope. And I think with something like eating disorders, there's so many people that might think, you know, I'm never going to get better, or they might suffer in silence. And so I was pretty young when I first started struggling with my eating disorder. I was 10. And at that time, it wasn't a conventional eating disorder. It was something that we would refer to now as ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. Now, I wasn't diagnosed at the time, but I was struggling with being able to swallow food. I was struggling to think that I could eat food and not have an allergic reaction. So as parents, my parents were like, well, you know, she must have really bad anxiety. What's going on? She's not eating. But it was never something that was taken so seriously. So throughout my teen years, I would just, you know, have moments where I would not eat for a couple of weeks or only survive off pumpkin soup because I was so petrified of what would happen if I would choke.
Is that because you did have allergies?
I didn't have allergies, but my brother did. So I was very hyper aware and hypersensitive to what he was going through. And he also choked on meat when I was younger as well. So I went through this traumatic experience seeing him, you know, nearly die from that. So it was over, you know, my teen years that my anxiety would just go up and down depending on what was going on in my life. But I guess the pinnacle of where things started to get really difficult for me was, it was when I was finishing high school and thinking about what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't have a passion. I didn't have a purpose. I wasn't ready to go to uni. And I started to put all of my attention towards my body. So prior to this, I didn't really have an awareness or a consciousness of my body size or shape and needing to change it. But it was during that time where I felt just really lost in the world, where I started focusing on my body and food. And I got attention. And that was something that I found really difficult because people would come up to me and ask me, you know, what are you eating or what are you doing to lose weight? And so I was like, okay, well, I'm getting this validation and I don't know who else I am and what value I have to offer to the world. So I guess I'm just going to focus on this. So, you know, I have a lot of empathy now for young people who are trying to navigate just the world and finding themselves and being able to feel like they have a purpose in life. And it makes a lot of sense that, you know, we go to the physical body in order to feel like we belong and to look a particular way to feel like we're accepted. So from that point, I started to put all of my energy into diet, exercise. I isolated myself from my friends. I was living with my mum at the time, and we'd moved from like a suburb called Warrandyte, which was kind of country vibes, to the city and away from my community. So I was really isolated, and it just kind of kept spiraling. It kept getting worse and worse and worse, and I was hiding it more and more. And I remember this one moment where I came home in the morning, and I must have been out exercising or doing something I shouldn't have been doing. And my mum was in the front room, and she was drying her hair. And she looked at me and she said, "Olivia, where have you been?" And I must have lied. And I call it the hairdryer moment, because she threw her hairdryer on the ground. And she's a very non-violent person, but threw her hairdryer on the ground and said, "You've got to get help. Like, you've got to stop." And I think for me in that moment, it really shook me into, okay, there must be a problem and I've got to do something about it.
Had she tried to bring it up with you prior to that moment?
A little bit, but I think she was hesitant, because I was also an adult at that point. Like, I was 20, 21. So she was letting me navigate my own path. And, she'd tried, but it didn't really land. I was pretty headstrong in, I'm going to do what I want to do.
And when you said doing things you shouldn't have been doing, like, had you had a conversation, or you would just hide certain behaviors?
I was obviously exercising too much. I knew I was exercising too much. I felt like I couldn't not do it. So in that, I knew it was a problem, but it was also such an important coping strategy for me. Like, my movement gave me so much joy, but also I knew I wasn't fueling my body well enough to sustain that, and I was losing weight. But I was also feeling better in myself, so it was tricky. So the idea of my mum saying, "You've got a problem," I was resistant to letting go and saying, okay, well, I need to get help. So it took a little bit of time before I actually agreed to see someone.
What did that look like? Like, what were the next steps involved when it came to actually getting help?
I was really lucky, and, lots of people don't have access to great support, but my parents kind of rallied together, and they looked, my parents were divorced, but they, were looking for different supports for me. And my dad just happened to meet the founder of the Butterfly Foundation at the time.
Oh, wow.
And it was a very random encounter. He was on a job site, and I think he kind of broke down, and someone said, "What's going on?" and happened to have a connection to her. So lucky they got to meet with Claire Middleton, her name is. And she said, okay, here are all these professionals that you need to see. Here is a dietitian, here is a psychologist, a GP. And so I was lucky in that sense that my parents knew this is the multidisciplinary team that we need, for recovery.
Sounds like it was like supposed to happen, that meeting.
Yeah.
I, with my experience, didn't seek support. I was in such denial, and also convinced that I kind of had to navigate it on my own. I had gone so long, lying and denying that there was an issue when people would ask and offer support, or, give me a moment to potentially open up. I'd shut it down. So when it came to the time where I was like, no, I need to actually get better, there was a big part of me that felt like I couldn't then go back and be like, you guys were right. Like, I had an issue this whole time. Can you help me now? Do you think that that's a common experience?
There's so much, it's so complex when it comes to recovery. And I think there's so much shame around our experiences. Talking about it with people can be really challenging, opening up to loved ones. I think lots of people struggle with the language of asking for help, and knowing that there's also a letting go that you have to do if you tell someone, or if you say, yeah, I've got a problem. It means sitting with a lot of uncomfortable feelings and doing really hard things, because recovery is not easy. Recovery feels a hell of a lot worse before it feels better. So yeah, I think seeking help can be really challenging, and opening up and asking for support for so many people is really hard.
So once you knew the professionals that you needed to see to get support for recovery, Can you actually go into what that looked like?
I want to say that at that point, things started to get better. But the tricky thing was that I had to leave my job because I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't manage recovery and working at the same time. And I also moved from living with my mum to living with my dad because my mum, again, was just struggling to manage what I was going through. And at that point in time, because I didn't have my exercise, my food behaviors, like that had been kind of taken away from me, and my job, I felt like a big part of my identity was gone too. So, and I'm not saying that that was the wrong thing to do. I had to take time off, but it gave me so much time to be giving to the eating disorder and thinking that I was focusing on recovery, but I was actually just so lost in my life that I was leaning more and more into the eating disorder. So, you know, luckily I did have this team around me and I was really trying, but I was just rapidly declining. And so, you know, I guess to just give you a picture of what it looked like is, you know, weekly sessions with a dietitian, weekly sessions with a psychologist, and medical monitoring with a GP. And also I saw a psychiatrist. So, you know, I had all the best people around me. But it was at the same time where my dad's father, my grandfather, was really unwell and he passed away. Actually, his birthday is the 17th of March.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Must be a good man.
Yeah, he was a great man. But so it was around that time where he was really unwell and he passed away. And I think my dad took his attention off me just literally for a couple of weeks. And I just, in the matter of a couple of weeks, I was in hospital. So,
oh, wow. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It was a quick decline, and I think it surprised everyone around me as well. And, you know, I was speaking to my mum about it this morning, and I said I was going to be coming on and having a chat to you. And I said, you know, from your experience as a carer, as a parent, is there anything that you would say? And she said, just don't wait. If you're a parent and you're seeing something in your loved one, don't wait in hope that it will just be a phase and it will pass. Like, just take action as quick as you can. So it's probably something that she would have done differently. But that decline, and because I became so unwell so quickly, my body went into a bit of a state of shock, and I started experiencing, I guess what you could call is like a delusional state. So I was, you know, seeing and hearing things, and also had an experience. And until to this day, I don't really understand what happened or why it happened, but it just did. I had an experience of like laying in the hospital bed and feeling like I was like I was dying.
Wow.
And I had this kind of white light and this feeling of peace come over me. And the smell of roses that I associated with my late aunt, who also had an eating disorder. And I had this kind of acceptance that, okay, maybe I'm just going to die. Like, maybe this is it.
Wow.
And I called my mum, and I literally called her and told her. And she was in Adelaide at the time, and was in complete shock, thinking, my gosh, what's going to happen? And then I was having these experiences of being called. You know, I was being called by voices to say, Olivia, it's time to go, it's time to go. And I remember this feeling of like actually saying it out loud, like no, and pushing back and going, no, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. And that lasted for maybe 5 days. I was having these experiences. And so, you know, I think the reason I wanted to touch on that is because maybe this has happened to somebody else, or maybe other people experience these kinds of things in their journey when they become really unwell, if they do. And so I think it's important that we share all different experiences of eating disorders. And so from that point, a few days later, I was also like not speaking. My brain wasn't functioning to the point where I could kind of put thoughts to words. So that was really hard for my family because I wasn't able to communicate what I was actually going through at the time.
Wow.
And I remember having this moment where it was almost like I was trying to figure something out. Like I was in this state of, I didn't have any awareness of what was day, what was night. I can't explain it. I'm trying, but I can't explain it. And I remember having this thought, this revelation, it felt like, and it was that everything equals love. And I remember going, oh my gosh, like I get it now. Like that's the meaning of life. And I told my brother, and that was when I started talking again. And he was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, But for me, it was so profound. And I had this, then I had this vision of me looking from above and kind of looking down at myself and looking down at the world and saying, like, if you're going to live, you're going to help people, and you're going to do this as your main purpose in life. And so at that point, I had no idea what I'd be doing today. I mean, I was pretty unwell and I was in hospital, but I think, it gave me this sense of I have a purpose and I have meaning. And if I can overcome this, I can do anything.
That's amazing. But it also sounds completely terrifying.
Completely terrifying, yeah.
I can definitely relate to the feeling of, your worth gets so wrapped up in your body and your appearance, and people commenting, saying, you look great, asking for tips at first, and then it gets to a certain point where you go beyond that and then you start looking unwell, and then people's comments flip from being, positive reinforcement to concern. But even still, your worth is so wrapped up in how you look, because how do you you can't just remove yourself that quickly. And that feeling of helplessness or hopelessness, that you can't imagine a life where there's meaning beyond that, or like you can't imagine yourself thinking about something else for so much of your time. So that's amazing that you had that, the feeling that you were going to go on to help people and something to get you through. What else was it in the times that you were really struggling that sort of pulled you out and kept you going?
I think my family was one. I was experiencing so much suffering. I remember thinking that, like, this can't be it. Like this can't be the meaning of life, that I just suffer so much. And I think that, I had so much support around me and so much encouragement and belief. Like my parents were just like unwavering belief that I could recover. And even when I was in hospital, I don't know why this is the case, but when carers and parents are told about the statistics of like recovery rates, and, they were told, expect to be on this journey for the next 7 years. And, they had to try and find hope that I could be the one that recovered, much quicker than that. I think they said only 2% recover in the first year. And my parents communicated that to me, and I was like, well, the Aries in me was like, I'm going to be that one.
Yeah.
Now, I won't say I recovered in the first year, because, it's definitely not a linear process. Recovery is up and down, and there's so much to it. And it's not just about recovery and recovering the body, but recovering your mind, your mindset, your whole life. It's a very holistic journey. But I definitely feel like I had a fire in my belly, and that kept me going in times when times were tough. And the treatment I experienced, I was very lucky to have, good treatment, hospital treatment. But, the treatment that we have here in Australia in the public system, unfortunately, or I don't know how you would, in my experience, I really wanted something that was more holistic and that was more conducive to full recovery, rather than it being me being in a hospital ward that was very sterile and not very inspiring. And so I felt like I always had this knowing that there has to be more to recovery than just being served a tray of food and going, here, like, okay, you've got 30 minutes to have your meal.
And eat it. I think having had an eating disorder myself, and I mentioned before we started chatting before that I was having a conversation with someone who has lived experience with an eating disorder. What we know about the thoughts that we've had is so different to someone who hasn't experienced it. And I think it's quite easy for someone who hasn't experienced it to look at people with an eating disorder and be like, why don't you just eat? Like, surely you can just put some food in your mouth. Can you talk about the actual fears around it and what's involved and why it isn't as simple as just eating?
Well, I think I'd firstly say that it's not a choice. You know, we don't choose to develop an eating disorder. And often there's so much intense stress and anxiety. Often the worse someone gets, the lower their body weight gets. Say they have a restrictive eating disorder and that's a part of what they're experiencing, the more petrifying it is to make change. And so, you know, saying to someone, just eat, you know, it is probably the worst thing that you could say to someone. But yes, as you were saying, unless you have been there, unless you've walked in similar shoes, it's hard to know what it actually feels like. And I remember when I was 16, I was watching daytime television, was watching Dr. Phil eating a nice bowl of pasta. And I remember seeing this girl with an eating disorder being interviewed. And I remember thinking, I would never develop an eating disorder. I love food too much. It's not a choice. I didn't choose it.
No. Can you remember some of the most complicated feelings that you were having when you were in the depths of it? Like, can you explain some of those?
When I finished treatment, I had restored a lot of my body weight, which was great in that I was safe, but I felt worse. So much worse, so much shame. Something else that, you know, we don't think about or talk about is it's not just about what's on the outside. There's so much going on an internal level. And we talk about, you know, our gut and our hair and our skin. I had so much focus prior to my eating disorder and during my eating disorder on looking aesthetically nice. And then in my eating disorder, I lost nearly all of my hair. My skin was brittle. My nails were brittle. And I also struggled a lot with, I guess, kind of rebound binge eating. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that if someone has a restrictive eating disorder, that's also a really common experience that they might go through. And there's a lot of shame associated with that. And that's really complex, but it's just so normal for people who are coming back from being so malnourished. And I had no idea what was going on at the time. I remember hiding it, from thinking I was hiding it, and just being so confused as to why I was just eating so much. And you know, I think one of the most difficult things was my parents thought that because I was weight restored, that I must be better, or I must be at least doing a lot better than they thought. But it was so much worse, like so much worse at that time. That was rock bottom.
That's awful. Yeah. I had a similar experience when even though I wasn't going through treatment, I was, you know, in recovery and trying to sort of do it myself, but, you know, stop myself from restricting. And I remember I gained quite a bit of weight quite quickly because your body latches onto everything, right? Like, I'd been starving myself, and from my understanding, my body was then like, oh, just in case we go through another starvation phase, let's hold on to everything. So even though I don't think I was eating an abnormal amount, like, you know, in extremes, I was trying to just eat like a regular, you know, breakfast, lunch and dinner. And my body was just storing everything. And that is the most uncomfortable feeling when you've been so used to living in quite a small frame and so obsessed by that, to then go to, you know, this body that you just don't recognize. It's really uncomfortable, and it's really hard to keep pushing forward with recovery when you're so uncomfortable in your body.
100%. And I think that's where it's so important in recovery that we try and focus away from the body as much as we can. It's tricky because, you know, if a part of someone's experience is about looking a certain way or having an external image or aesthetic that they're trying to achieve, then needing to completely focus away and allow the body to do what it needs to do in order to heal and to rebalance, that's terrifying. And I think for me, one of the most powerful things that I did in my recovery was to just trust that my body was innately very smart and I'd put it through hell and it needed time to find its equilibrium again. And so to not then go on another diet or to try and change my body when I had gained, more weight than my set point was at, was really hard.
Yeah.
Such a tricky place to be in.
How long do you think it did take to get to a point where you didn't feel like you were consumed by the eating disorder anymore?
It's so hard to say because, like I said before, it's such a journey and there's so many different stages that we go through in recovery. But I think it took me from when I first started treatment to when I felt like I was healed, let's say, maybe 3 years.
Okay. And now do you think that you are recovered? Because I find it, I've had this conversation with a few people who've experienced eating disorders that I don't know if I ever would say that I'm fully recovered. I think that it's like a journey of recovery, probably potentially forever, which might sound daunting to someone who's going through it. But I just think, like for me, I find there are times when, stress is heightened and more things are going on in my life where I'll have some of those old thoughts and I just have to make a conscious effort to not act on it, like not bring back the behaviors. What do you think about that?
I think everyone has to define their own recovery and if it feels more realistic for you to say, I will be in recovery forever and I just have to manage it and maintain it, then I think that that's totally fair. I trained with a woman called Carolyn Costin, and she's probably one of the most well-known eating disorder professionals globally. And she has a philosophy that, she believes anyone can be fully recovered. And that means that the eating disorder self and the healthy self are integrated back into our core. So it doesn't mean that we are immune to any experience of ever going through something again. Of course, I'm not saying I can't relapse or I won't relapse, but I think when you've gone through something and you've developed the tools and the skills to be able to take care of yourself, you just know that going back there isn't going to be where you want to go.
Yeah.
But, I say I'm fully recovered, but I'm a human. And I have my days. I have my days where I don't feel comfortable in my body. But I think what you spoke to before is, you don't act on it or you're mindful of not acting on it.
Yeah.
So for me, what I say, when the eating disorder self and healthy self are integrated back into your core, the important thing is that eating disorder part then becomes the alarm system. So if something's going on, it's that little alarm system that goes off and goes, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable in my body, but what am I going to do about it? Am I going to engage in a destructive behavior or am I going to, pull on my toolkit of other things? Am I going to reach out to someone? Am I going to, take some time in nature? What is it that I need to do to fill up my cup and get myself back to baseline? Because it's not about my body, but me feeling uncomfortable. Me feeling uncomfortable in my body is a window into that something else is out of balance.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And people often say that it's an eating disorder is a control thing. What do you think about that?
I think it's a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think that, it's someone experiences, say in childhood, an overwhelming childhood where everything is out of control and the one thing that they can control is their food and their body, then yeah, it can be about control. And I would say that, as someone with a perfectionistic temperament and someone who likes things to be a particular way, I think that was something, like I would say that I'm more kind of prone to going down that control pathway and for things to be a bit more my way and clear.
Same. Yeah. I definitely think that there's you know, from my experience of the people that I know that have gone through eating disorders, you know, very common personality traits. Do you see that in the clients that you work with?
Yeah, it's actually quite amazing. And lots of my clients who, for example, have gone through a restrictive eating disorder have similar temperaments. So we're all born with a temperament that doesn't necessarily change, but it expresses itself in different ways. So I'm still a perfectionist. You know, I still like for things to be in a particular way and in a particular order, but I've learned how to balance that and for that to not be something that controls my life. So, you know, it's about not changing that, not making my perfectionism bad, but looking at, okay, well, what's the other side of that I have attention to detail. And I know when I'm kind of going over the top with my perfectionism.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's something that shows up a lot. I think also for people who struggle with maybe binge eating disorder or bulimia, they might be a little bit more chaotic in their life. They might be, you know, it might be more of a spontaneous temperament. So I think we all have to look at who we are and how you know, our energy expresses itself and our temperament expresses ourselves, and find balance, like get to know ourselves and find balance in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love for you to explain how you went from your recovery journey to then becoming a coach and what that looks like for you now.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, I had this fire in my belly during my recovery to want something different for other people. I remember thinking that, like, there has to be another way. There has to be another way than just doing it the way I've done it. And when I was growing up, you know, I was lucky to have a mum that was, you know, interested in kind of alternative therapies, and she had, you know, a spiritual side to her. And so these concepts were always something that were brought up around me, but I'd never really kind of connected to it for myself. So there was a time where I was living at my dad's house and I was at rock bottom. And as I said before, my dad said, okay, well, you're seemingly doing a lot better now. It's time for you to kind of step out into the world and do something with your life. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. Like, I've got to do something with my life. And I took like a leap of faith, and I didn't feel ready to, but I started looking for jobs, and I managed to find a job that had nothing to do with what I was interested in, but it was a full-time job. And I worked as a logistics coordinator. I don't even know what that is, but it was a job and it was great. And I moved out of home. I moved to Middle Park on the beach, and I found a beautiful place to live, and I started to kind of take responsibility for my life. And something in that taking responsibility, I also started looking at, well, how am I going to help myself to heal properly on a deeper level? Yes, I'm still seeing my dietitian, my psychologist, the medical professionals in an outpatient capacity, but I also knew that healing, there was going to be more to it. And so I started doing things like yoga. I was spending time in nature. I was doing journaling. And I was kind of dreaming up what would have been the perfect place for me to recover. And I started doing research online, and I found this amazing woman, Carolyn Costin, who built a treatment center 35, 40 years ago now called Montanito. And it was a recovery support, hospital support, essentially, in a home-like setting in beautiful nature in Malibu. And it was a place in which she really showed people, rather than, I guess, just serving food on a tray, how can you get into the kitchen and actually cook food and be a part of a community and look at, more holistic approaches to recovery in her treatment center. They did yoga, and, they had, ceremonies, and it was, I guess, more spiritual in that sense. So I found her, and I also found, I was so curious about what the rest of the world was doing in terms of recovery treatment. And before my eating disorder, I had no confidence. Like, just wouldn't even call my mechanic to be like, get and book my car in. My mum had to do it. But then at that point, once I'd gone through my eating disorder, I was so like, I've got to make a change. And I ended up going to America and going on this cold calling adventure and reaching out to all these treatment centers and saying, I want to learn. Can you teach me what you do? And I want to do something in Australia. Anyway, I ended up finding this treatment center that was founded by a dietitian called Melanie Rogers. And she's also an Aussie. And I think when she learned that there's this kid in Australia that wants to learn about what she can do differently and bring back home, straight away she was, really open to me coming. And she said, just move here and we'll figure it out.
That's awesome. So you learnt to do what you do in the States?
Kind of.
Okay.
So I worked in that treatment center for 6 months, and then I studied to be a recovery coach once I got back to Australia with Carolyn Costin. She has an institute where she trains coaches. So I got all these different ideas of different treatment modalities from the US, and I guess I brought them back home. And I started my business on Uncovery.
So cool. So can you talk me through what Uncovery does and what do you focus on with your clients?
Yeah. So we're an eating disorder recovery coaching service, and we work with people alongside other treatment team members. So we would say that our role is to help people with the here and now and like the practical components of recovery and what that looks like. So we're not treating the eating disorder, but we're helping to implement the treatment goals that the team are setting. And it's very real life. So we do things like grocery shopping, meal support, cooking. We're actually would say like a recovery ally for someone on their journey. And, having, I guess another really big thing with what we do is that myself and my team, I've got other coaches on my team, we're all recovered, and inspiring hope that it's possible to get from being in a really difficult, dark place to, thriving in life. It's pretty amazing to be able to share that with people.
Yeah, that's so cool. I definitely think that when I was younger, I used to watch, do you remember that show, Super Size versus Super Skinny? Did you ever watch that?
Yeah.
Did you guys watch that? Oh, it was so bad in hindsight. At the time, I found it quite fascinating, but I also remember thinking this is awful what they're doing to them, like shaming the person who was living in the larger body as well as the person who was underweight, taking photos of what their body looked like and showing us exactly what they ate, and then forcing them to swap their diets. And I remember seeing that and feeling like it's similar to what you said about like watching someone with Dr. Phil and being like, oh, I would never have an eating disorder. I remember watching the underweight people and being like, oh, I would never restrict myself from all the things that I love. And I would just never do that. But also the fear around, oh my God, if you get an eating disorder, it's so unlikely that you'll recover. Like I remember seeing all of that and thinking like, there's no hope. And so when I experienced my eating disorder, I remember feeling that way as well. I think it's amazing what you're doing by, literally having people in the face of people with an eating disorder, showing that there is hope and that you can get to the other side and you can live a happy, fulfilled life where you're not focusing on food and your body every moment of every day. What do you think is the most helpful aspect for clients? I know it's obviously different for everyone, but what do you think the key, I don't know, maybe three things that really tend to be helpful across the board?
Oh, it's just three. Okay.
You can give me more if you want.
Oh, there is so many things, but I think that, helping someone to know, like I said before, that full recovery is possible, and being able to demonstrate that, like to show them what it looks like, to role model, a life that is fully recovered, I would say is one really important part. Helping someone to understand that they are not their eating disorder, that it's something that they are experiencing and something that they're going through, and to not make it bad I think that's really important to help people to see, is that the eating disorder is something that's serving a purpose, and it's there for a reason, whether that's a coping strategy or a protective strategy, that it's something that's playing a role in their life at the time. And so we don't want to like dismiss it and make it bad. We want to welcome it in and maybe not do what it's saying, but understand what need is trying to be met. And so, you know, helping people to discern between what's their eating disorder self and what's their healthy self is really important. I believe that we always have an essence, a core healthy self, and it doesn't matter how unwell somebody is, that they will always have that there. And we need to help people to tap into that. And it's their own healthy self that's going to heal them, that it's going to grow, and it's going to be the thing that takes over the role of the eating disorder. So, no, I think helping people to see that they have the power always, no one can take that away from them. And I would say helping people to have a neutral relationship with their body, neutral and respectful relationship with their body is really important. You know, we live in a time where there's lots of, you know, we speak about social media and even body positivity accounts, which is so wonderful. There's a lot of that out there. But if we think about someone who's come from a place of really hating their body, getting to a place of loving it might feel really like just impossible to get to. So a philosophy that we use and focus on a lot in Uncovery a lot is to develop a neutral relationship with food and their body. And so it's kind of falling in the middle rather than striving for something that might feel so far away. And the benefit of that too is that it's not about, you know, needing to like attain a certain goal. It's about the body being the vehicle to experience life.
I love that. Someone that I've really loved following is Taryn, or is it Taryn? Taryn Bromford. Yeah. And she released an amazing documentary, it's probably 10 years ago or so now, Embrace. And she talks about that and how our body is a vessel or a vehicle, not an ornament. And I think it's so important. And I love what you say about, you know, feeling neutral towards your body rather than looking at it and thinking it's amazing. I don't think that that's attainable, particularly for people who have come from hating their body. But generally, I don't think I know anyone who looks at themselves every day and thinks, God, I look good. You know, whether it's your face or your body. It's just a really, unattainable goal.
And it's empty, you know, like, yes, okay, we all love feeling nice, but I think that comes from the inside. And I think that, you know, we have to take care of our body. We have to respect it. And that's why, you know, I said it's important to respect it, not dismiss it. Like, we still have to take care of it, nourish it and move it, be kind to it. I think our thoughts and the way we speak about our body and speak about bodies in general is so important. And I think these are the things that, you know, if we're practicing that, our body is going to continue to change throughout our life, right? So what do we do when we age? What do we do if we go through pregnancy, or when we go through pregnancy and our body changes? You know, we have to have a different relationship with it. Otherwise, we're going to be experiencing constant suffering.
Definitely. You mentioned the language, you know, when we're speaking to ourselves about our body. How important is also the language from strangers or the people around you when it comes to your body?
Oh, so important. And I think, you know, if we speak about the impact that parents and carers can have, it's so important to be, you know, looking at how you're speaking about your own body. You know, do you have your own internalized fat phobia, you know, or I think that's something that many people do have. And because of the world that we live in, thin, small is good. And being in a larger body is considered bad, which, you know, is something that we need to examine and continue examining within ourselves, because that makes a really big difference in how we speak to others. And I think it's so important. Language is so important.
I literally had a woman, I was on the plane the other night, and she was handing out want sausage rolls? And I said, no thanks, I'm good. I just wasn't hungry. I'd already eaten. And she said, oh yeah, looks like you haven't eaten a sausage roll in your life. And I just didn't say anything, but I was like, people don't realize how damaging comments like that are. Like if I was still experiencing an eating disorder, I think for me when I was really in it was the amount of thoughts that I was having about my body and food was exhausting. But I hoped that people didn't think about my body as much as I did. But whenever someone commented, I'm like, oh, okay, well, you are thinking about my body. So I must keep thinking about this. Like I feel like it feeds the beast.
Yeah.
I also find online, like when I was going through a really stressful time a couple of years ago and really struggling to eat because I was so anxious. And people were saying like, oh, I know you're going through a hard time, but at least you look good. And again, that like feeding the beast of being like, well, that's the most important thing about me. Like it doesn't matter if I'm super anxious or I'm sad or I'm not sleeping and I can't eat. If my body is small, then things are fine.
Yeah.
Oh, can you give some tips around that, around language and bodies and what not to say?
Just flat out don't comment on someone's body.
Yeah.
You know, it's as simple as that. Like, you know, whether they look like they've lost weight or whether they look like they've gained weight, it's just not something that we should be focusing on. If you're worried about someone, if you're worried about the fact that, you know, you can see that their body has changed, ask them about how they're feeling first. You know, I think that that's so important because we don't know what's going on. We have to be really sensitive to that. Never comment on someone's body. You know, like if you feel like someone has changed, if you feel like they're going through a hard time, ask them about, you know, their emotions. And you can say things like, I notice that your energy has gone, or you don't seem like yourself, like, you know, your humor has disappeared. Those kinds of things can help someone to feel seen and validated rather than judged.
I would love for you to give some really clear takeaways for people if they have a loved one or a friend, you know, friend or family member who they think might be going through an eating disorder. What would you suggest that they do?
Educate yourself first. You know, if you feel like someone, like a loved one is struggling, firstly, educate yourself so you understand what you're dealing with. You understand eating disorders and, you know, you can look at resources like the Butterfly Foundation have, you know, great resources. You know, if you're worried about a loved one, I think, again, being really gentle and patient and asking them how they're feeling. Don't comment on their body. Ask them about their emotions and what's going on for them. And you can notice that and point out that they've changed in terms of their energy. I think it's really important, as I said earlier, my mum's takeaway is to don't wait. You know, you can broach the topic with a loved one, make sure that you are picking a time that is good, that is not a high, you know, you're not in a high stress environment, and that you're clear on what you want to say and what you want to share with that person before you then have that conversation, because it is really sensitive. And seek help. You know, I think in terms of where to go, again, another good resource is the Butterfly Foundation. You can call their helpline, or as a carer, there's another organisation called Eating Disorders Families Australia. Great for, you know, information on how to help a loved one. But I think I would just start with those main points.
And what about for someone listening who is struggling and doesn't know, you know, what to do for the first step in seeking support? What would you recommend?
Well, firstly, know that you're not alone, and that reaching out for help doesn't make you weak. Don't try and do it alone. We can. We're pretty hyper independent. I don't know if you feel that too, but yeah.
That's why I literally tried to do it all on my own. Yeah.
Yeah. We can, but it's probably going to take a lot longer, and we don't need to.
I wouldn't recommend it.
No. Don't do that. Don't do that. You know, reach out to someone. You could go to a doctor, you go to a GP. I think I'm hesitant in saying that because sometimes GPs don't always have great experience with eating disorders. So look for a specialist, you know.
Can I say on that? I had a GP years ago, and it was the first time that I'd actually spoken to a professional, because I was like, I felt like I was getting better, but I felt like I needed additional support. So I said, I've had an eating disorder. I'm feeling, you know, I'm having more negative thoughts around my body than usual, and I'm worried about that. And she looked at me and said, well, you don't look underweight. And I was like, oh my God, like she couldn't have said anything worse.
No.
Because then there's this like fear that you're not sick enough to seek support. And she literally made me feel like that. So yeah, I'm glad that you flagged that with GPs. I think seeking specialist support is definitely important.
Yeah. And also GPs don't get a lot of training in eating disorders too. So, you know, they can say things that are harmful without perhaps realizing. I think that's changing. But, you know, that experience I've heard quite often with the clients that we see. And so often we get people that come to us at times where, you know, maybe they've never seen someone before and they don't know where to go. So although we don't work on our own as recovery coaches, people can come to us and, you know, we are that first point of contact, and it's that first point of contact is really important, and we can often refer to different providers that specialize in eating disorders. So I would recommend trying to find someone specialized, whether it's a dietitian, a psychologist, or a coach.
Is there anything that you're working on with Uncovery at the moment that you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of my passion is innovation and finding different ways that we can help people. And something that we've been working on for the past few months now is pulling together the collective 12 years of experience of myself and my team to develop a program that I guess addresses some of the most important parts of someone's journey. And I think that, you know, what we are really focusing on in this program is helping people to overcome the binge restrict cycle. I think it's such a tricky area. We are focusing a lot on developing and helping people to attain the tools to be body neutral, to have a conscious relationship with food. Conscious eating is a type or a philosophy that we work from that's really unique and really important. And the other thing is finding meaning and purpose in life and helping people to live in alignment with their values, to be able to learn skills, to manage emotions and feelings, dismantle diet culture. I think that's something so important. And the last thing that I'm so passionate about is helping people to cut the generational ties and to choose, how do I want to live? What do I want my relationship with food to be? And what do I want to be passing down, you know, in the ways that we can have an impact on? I'm not saying that, you know, yes, there's genetic factors and we're learning more that there are genes that, you know, do influence, you know, someone there, whether they're going to develop an eating disorder or not. It's very new. We don't know a lot about it yet. But in terms of the environment and the impact that we have on the people around us, there's a lot that we can do. So that's something I'm really passionate about.
So good. You're doing such amazing work.
Thanks.
I would love to know more. Like, I'd love to, come along and check it all out, if that's possible, maybe. You have mentioned the Butterfly Foundation, which is a foundation that I love, and I've worked with them before over the years. Can you tell me about the work that you're doing with them at the moment?
Yeah, so I guess something else I'm really passionate about is helping people to transform their lived experience into a purposeful career. I feel so lucky that I've been able to do that, and I've been able to turn my pain into purpose. And there's so many people that want to use their lived experience, who've recovered from this terrible illness. I don't usually use that word, but this experience of having an eating disorder, and to be able to inspire hope for other people is so important and so powerful. I have people emailing me multiple times a week saying, how do I become a coach? So something that the Butterfly Foundation and the National Eating Disorders Collaboration are doing is developing peer workforce guidelines. And this is something that we were building last year, and it's something that's kind of happening at the moment. So it's an area that I'm really passionate about, and I love helping people to, you know, transform their lived experience into a career. I'd love to know a little bit more about your experience of recovery and how you navigate that now. Obviously, being, you know, you've been on your own recovery journey and you're someone who's in the public eye. How do you navigate that?
There's a lot of things that I do. I think it's tricky because, you know, you speak about people finding a purpose and a meaningful life separate to the eating disorder. A lot of my work, whether or not I try to remove myself from it, it is still quite, people focus a lot on my appearance and they comment a lot on my appearance. They comment on my weight, they comment on what I wear, but it's also just part of what I do. I think setting boundaries around that has been really important, and not letting people's comments hold too much weight, whether they're positive or negative. You know, if I let people's positive comments mean too much to me, then the negative ones do as well. So trying to just sort of be neutral about what people say to me is a big part of that. And really taking, you know, meaningful comments just from my family and friends and the people that are in my close circle and mean more to me. That's a big one. Exercising in a way that's not about my appearance. So, you know, focusing on, like, I love running, and I've had to really rebuild my relationship with exercise in a way that's like setting goals about being fitter and stronger and faster, not burning X amount of calories. So, you know, whenever I'll post a workout, I try to blur out the calories, like, because I'm not focusing on that. I don't want other people to focus on that. It isn't about that. And it's not a punishment. It's like, I get to run and I get to use my body to do things and feel good and feel stronger, rather than I ate X, Y, and Z, so I need to go and exercise for a certain amount of time. Also cooking. Like, I love what you said about getting your patients to, you know, go grocery shopping and actually like produce good food, you know, nourishing foods. That's been massive for me. I think during my eating disorder, I was so scared of so many foods that I really steered away from shopping, and I found supermarkets overwhelming, and I didn't cook. But I cook all the time now, and, you know, making sure that it's really colourful and I'm including all sorts of different things and not restricting and not being super strict on what I eat. Yeah, all of those things are really key parts. And I think just generally just taking care of myself as a whole human. So getting enough sleep and, you know, human connection, making sure I'm surrounding myself with good people, just like meeting my basic needs. I feel like all of those things, if they're good, then the eating disorder, you know, that voice never comes back, or doesn't come back as frequently. We can squash it. I wrap up every episode the same way with a little segment called Oranges and Lemons. If you can share a lemon, it's something a bit more negative that might have happened today or over the last few days, and then your orange is your highlight.
I can't think of a lemon. I think it's just been a good week.
That's good. We often have people that can't think of a lemon, and I think it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. An orange, I'd say. There's been two. I spent the last week in Noosa. Something I'm so grateful of with my work is that I can just kind of be anywhere and work anywhere. So just being able to change the scenery and have new inspiration was so lovely. And I attended a conference last week as well when I came back from Noosa. It was an eating disorders think tank. And a really beautiful reflection I had was the first conference I went to in 2018 when I first started. I felt like I'm so insignificant here. I'm just this little recovery coach that has no place. The next year I presented at that same conference.
So cool.
And then the following year I presented at the international conference. And then this conference was the first one that I'd been to in a while where I actually felt like I've worked with so many people here, and I can see that lived experience is being elevated. And I know that deep down I've actually had a really important part to play in that, and that felt really good. So
that's so cool. Well done. Thanks. Yeah, congratulations. That's an awesome orange. My lemon is that I'm a bit sick, but I'm sure it'll go away, hopefully, across the week. And my orange is that I just spent a very wholesome weekend with my family, which always fills the cup. So it's
Beautiful.
a good orange. And having you on here has also been an orange. So thank you so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to chat to someone who really gets it. And I think the work you're doing is incredible. So thank you, Olivia.
Thanks, Liv. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Tell Me More. This show wouldn't be possible without you. If you'd like to show your support, please subscribe or follow the podcast on your favourite platforms. And don't forget, you can watch full episodes on YouTube and Spotify.